Hey guys, welcome back to a new video, and in this video I'm going to show you how you can use preferences data store in your Kotlin multiplatform projects. What is preferences data store? Preferences data store is actually used to store small piece of information, mostly key value pair. So let's get started with our video and see how we can actually store a key value pair information in our preferences data store. So open up your KMP preference data store project. By the way, you can get this project from my GitHub repository. Link is in the description box. This project contains all of the basic things that you want. So mostly I have added all the dependencies, to be honest. Open up your shared module build gradle KTS. We have these two dependencies for data store and the preferences. In the Android app build gradle, I have added these two dependencies, the same dependencies basically. Okay, so now it's time to create our preferences data store, and I'm going to do that in our shared module because shared module will be shared across our both platform. So in this common main, I'm going to create a file, and the file name is preferences.datastore. We have a function create data store pref, and we have to pass here a lambda, and lambda name is produce path. Return type of this lambda is string, and the whole function will eventually return a data store preferences. We'll use here return, and in this we're gonna use preferences data store factory that has a function create with path, and in this we have to locate the path. Where do we want to create our preferences data store, in Android or in iOS? So we'll use our incoming function produce path and convert the return type, which is a type of string, into path, and that's it. This will eventually create preferences data store for us. Just below to it, I'm going to create a const val data store file name, and I'm going to call this pref data store. So this is nothing but it's a file name for our preferences data store file. Now it's time to create a function create data store, and the return type of this function is again data store, type is preferences, and this is not a normal function, it's expect function. And within this function we're gonna pass one parameter context, and type of this thing any, which is nullable. It's time to give the actual declaration for expect function create data store in iOS and Android. So add missing actual declaration for Android and for iOS. Okay, so right now we are in the iOS, so let's write the iOS first, and in this we'll use create data store preferences, and in this lambda we have to return a path which is a type of string. So I'm going to return here empty string for the time being, and now I'm going to create a variable naming document directory. Use ns file manager. We have here default manager, and in this we have function url for directory. So first we have to mention the directory, so I'm using here ns document directory. Next we have in domain. In domain is actually coming from our ns user domain mask. Next we have appropriate for url, which is null. We have error, and I'm going to use here null for the error, and lastly we have create, which is false. Okay, so this is an foreign API, so simply use experimental foreign API. This will give you ns url. Now it's time to use our ns url. So for that, sometime it will give you null. I'm using here a require nor null. Pass your document directory, and in this document directory we'll actually interested in the path, and in this path we're gonna add slash, and lastly I'm gonna add my file name, which is data store file name. So it will provide me the file name, and once we got the file name we'll actually have our data store preferences. So simply return it, and that's it. This is for the iOS. So what we did in here, we simply create a file in this location. Cool. So this is for the iOS. Now let's jump for the Android, and for the Android it's very easy. So for the Android, first typecast your context into context, and in this use files directory. We have a function naming resolve, and in this resolve you can simply pass your data store file name. This will return your file, and in this file we are interested in the absolute path. Okay, now it's time to use create data store preferences function. So create data store pref and simply pass this path within this and return it. So it will eventually create a data store for you. So that's it for the creation of our data store. Now it's time to use it. So go back to your common main, and in this common main I'm gonna create a class, and the class name is store manager. And in this store manager we have to pass our store. Type of this thing is data store, type is preferences, and make sure to use here wall. We have a suspend function for save. In this we can pass our key and the value. Use your store, and in this store we have edit, and in this edit, as you can see, the type that we are receiving in a form of it is mutable preferences, and in this mutable preferences we have to pass our key. Now here you can't directly use this key. So if you want to build a key for preferences data store, use your string preferences key, or if you want to use your int preferences key, you can create that thing very easily by using int preferences key. But for our use case, let's use string preferences key. Pass your key and the value, and make sure this will be execute on IO thread. So this with context, pass your dispatcher.io, and in this simply put it and import your IO. So this function is actually used to save your information. Now it's time to retrieve the saved information. Suspend function get value, pass your key, type of the key is string, and return type of this thing is string. Again I'm using with context, pass dispatcher.io because I want to use dispatcher IO thread, and return it. Now in this use your store, and this time we'll use data. We have map just to perform the transformation. We'll receive here mutable preferences, and in this simply use string preferences key, pass your key, and if it will give you a null, on that case just simply return error string, and that's it. For the time being it will return you a flow of type string. So we are interested in the first emission, and that's it. This will provide you the value. Now let's use this thing in Android. So for that, open up your Android app, source Java main activity, and in this main activity, first thing first, I'm gonna create a variable for my store manager. Remember, and let me import this remember. In this remember we have store manager, and the requirement of store manager is data store, type is preferences. So I'll simply use here create data store and pass my context. So let's create context by using local context dot current, and simply pass it. So this will give you your store manager. Now it's time to create 2 text field and 2 button, and also 1 text composable. So all of the thing I'm gonna wrap within a column. This column have modifier, fill max size, we have vertical arrangement which is on the center, horizontal alignment is also on the center. Let me make some space for you. Now in this column we have text field. So if we have text field, we also need to create few states. So variable first is key, and I'm using here remember savable mutable state of empty. Similarly we have for the value, and lastly we have state for our saved value. Simply import this remember savable. Alright, so in the text field in place of value I'm gonna use my key, and if everything got changed, we'll simply update our key with the incoming value, and we'll use here modifier fill max width. So we have text field for the key. Now I'm gonna simply duplicate this thing, and this is for the value. So instead of using key, we'll use here value. Remove this key with value. Just below to it we'll have a button. So on click of this, we'll simply save the info, and just below to it we have one more button, and this button is actually used to fetch information from our store manager. In the UI I'm using a text which says get, and for the top of my button I'm gonna create a UI for this button which says save. Okay, so because our store manager function is suspendable function, so in order to access suspendable function we'll require a coroutine scope. So just create here a coroutine scope with the help of remember coroutine scope. Okay, so if this button clicked on that occasion, we'll use scope launch and make sure to launch this thing on dispatcher.io. Use your store manager and save this info by passing key and value. Next, if we want to retrieve the information from our store manager, we'll use scope.launch. Again, make sure to use here dispatcher.io. We have saved value naming state, and we're gonna update that state with the help of store manager.getValue and simply pass your key. Okay, so on the top of this text field I'm gonna create a text, and this text is actually used to show us the saved value. And we are pretty much done. Just use spacer to give some space. Alright, so we are pretty much done. Now it's time to execute Android app. Okay, so first is for the key. So in place of key I'm using here key, and in place of value I'm using here value. Save it. Okay, so app is crashing. Let me see why it is crash. Alright, so this error arises because of the file name that we were using. So go to your common main and change the file name. So source common main preferences datastore, and here just use preferences underscore pb, and now re-execute the app. Okay, so use key as a key and value as value and save it. Just use get. As you can see, this value is coming. Now if I re-execute the app and use here key and get the value corresponding to this key, we are receiving the value. That means it is properly cached in our user device. Now it's time to execute this thing in our iOS app. But before that, open up your iOS main module, go to the preferences datastore, and just below to it I'm gonna create here an object, pref datastore for iOS. And in this object we're gonna create a function get datastore, and this will eventually use create data store, and in place of context I'm gonna use null. So if you check the return type, it will eventually return you data store type is preferences. Now let's open this project in our iOS or Xcode. Alright, so this is our iOS app, and in this first I'm gonna build my store manager which is initialized with the help of store manager. So first thing first, just simply press command B to rebuild your project so that all of the dependencies are accessible from Xcode. Okay, so now I'm gonna use here store manager. As you can see, now it is available. Requirement of this thing is store. So we can get this store from shared. Let me see the name. So we have pref data store for iOS. Simply use this object. Because it's an object, that means it is singleton, and to access singleton for iOS we'll use shared. We have get data store, so we have our store manager. Now it's time to build few states. So private variable first for the key, next we have one more state for our value, and again last state is for our saved value. Type of this thing is string. Now in this service tag I'm gonna attach two text field, two button and one text. So on the top we have our text, and in this text I'm gonna use my saved value. Just change the style by using .system size is 15. Then we have text field, and in place of title key I'm gonna use enter key. and in place of binding I'm using dollar key, and my style is rounded border. Simply copy this text field, replace this key with value, and also change the binding from key to value. Just make some space. Okay, so now we have two text field, one is for the key, one is for the value. Now it's time to use button. Use button that has action and label, and for the action just leave it. For the label we'll use a text, and this text says save, and for the action we'll use task, because all of the functions that we have in our store manager is nothing but a suspendable function. So in order to use suspendable or something which is asynchronous in iOS, we'll have to use this task, and in this task we'll use do catch because sometimes it might throw an exception, and if anything goes wrong we'll simply print the error message. Now in this do we'll use await, try await, use our store manager and save the information. Just pass your key and the value, so this will simply save your information in the preferences data store. Now it's time to get the information. So to do that just create one more button, use action label. So for the action just leave it, for the UI use here text, and it says get. Build a task, use do catch, print the error if you got any in the future, and in the do simply use here try await store manager dot get value, pass your key, and simply update your saved value that we have as a state. By the way, this is something which is only accessible from the main thread, so I'm using here dispatch queue dot main dot async, and in this block I want to update this thing. So just cut this thing from here, create a let, and call this saved info. First we should collect the information in this variable, and after that we'll update our saved value by using saved info. So yeah, that's it for our iOS site. Now it's time to execute the application and see whether it is working or not. But before that, in this v stack I want to attach padding of 12. Now I'm gonna execute it. Okay, so here you can see enter key. So I'm gonna use here key in place of value. I'm using value. Save it, and when you click on this get, this is our value. Now re-execute our application to see whether this information is cached or not. Now in this key simply use key and click on this get. As you can see, this is our saved value. So yeah, that's it for this video. In this video we saw how to use preferences data store in Kotlin multi-platform projects. If you have any doubt, any comment, any suggestion, you can write the thing in the comment box, and we will meet in our next video where we will discuss about Kotlin multi-platform things or Android. Till that, goodbye.